Did you ever wish that you could be learning more about songwriting while you're driving, or mowing the grass, or washing the dishes? Well, podcasts could be exactly the thing for you. And there are a lot of great podcasts out there specifically for songwriters. Today, I'm going to tell you about my 10 favorite podcasts for songwriters and why you should check them out. Hi, I'm Brian from Unmute Your Muse TV, where we teach 5-minute masterclasses on songwriting. We use the gold songwriting solution to teach you to write songs that people will love, buy, and tell their friends about. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the concept of podcast, a podcast is just an audio recording, kind of like an old radio show, but rather than being broadcast over radio waves, you download it usually just to your phone, and it comes out sometimes, some of them are daily, some of them are weekly, monthly, something like that. They come out on somewhat of a regular basis, and there's an app on your phone that you can listen to it with. So if you have an Apple phone, if you have an iPhone, there's an app that comes preloaded. It's called it's just Apple Podcasts. It's just the podcast app. It's purple, has a couple little white circle kind of things on it. If you're using an Android or some other kind of phone, there's an app that comes with a lot of those called Stitcher, or there are literally hundreds of different podcast apps that you can have on your phone. And then you subscribe to whatever podcast feeds you want. So for each of the ones that I'm going to list up coming up, you can either just search in whatever your podcast app is, and you will be able to find them by the name that I give you, or I'm also in the show notes going to include links to the main website for each of these podcasts if you'd like to get to them from that point of view. All right, now before I dive into my list, let me tell you about how I picked each of these podcasts, because there are a lot more than 10 podcasts on songwriting out there. The criteria were they had to be active, still producing songs on a semi-regular basis. They had to be ongoing and not just some short little 10-episode thing and then it was done. And I was also looking for some various perspectives to give you so that not all of them are just interviews with some famous songwriter ad nauseum, or I wanted to give you some different kinds of podcasts so you can pick something that is really going to work for what you're looking for. Now, these aren't in any kind of ranked order. It's not like the number 1 is the best and number 10 is the worst or anything like that. I'm just going to give you a whole bunch of options here for you to check out. Up first, we have Sodajerker on songwriting. Now, Sodajerker is a British duo of songwriters, Simon Barber and Brian O'Connor, who go by the name Sodajerker. And in their podcast, they interview one artist per week and talk about their career, what they're doing currently, to get their insights on the songwriting process. There's really a lot of good depth, and they ask really good questions. A lot of the artists are British, because they are based in Britain, but if there's some people from other parts of the world who happen to be touring through at the moment and they can grab an interview with them, then they'll get some outside points of view from that too. It's really good listen. Check it out. Up next, number 2 is And the Writer Is. The host is Ross Golan, and he's a professional songwriter. Of note, he is one of the major forces behind getting the Music Modernization Act passed through Congress earlier in 2019. That's an act that redid a lot of how copyright works and made things a lot better for artists and songwriters. So kudos to Ross and all of the people that he worked with to getting that across. Each week, Ross interviews a different person who happens to be a professional songwriter. Sometimes they also are a performer, but a lot of times these are the people who are behind the scenes writing songs for the big hits or the big names that you all know about. It's really worthwhile. Check it out. Up next, number 3 is Heat Rocks. Now, this is one that I've personally only gotten into recently, but I really like it. It's hosted by Oliver Wang and Morgan Rhodes, and each week they have a guest on, and they break apart one classic album that was life-changing in the person who's listening to it, or something that made a huge pivot in the music scene at the time when it came out. And they'll talk about some of the cultural context from it, some of the recording technology, some of the things behind why the songs were written the way they were, and what kind of impact they had on culture. It's a very different take from what most of these other podcasts are, and if you're into that kind of stuff, it's really cool. Check it out. Up next, number 4, is Nakedly Examined Music, hosted by Mark Linsenmeyer. Now, Mark's a little more famous for the other podcast that he runs, which is called Partially Examined Life, which is the biggest philosophy podcast in the world, which some of you may or may not be interested in that kind of stuff. You should check that out, too. But in Nakedly Examined Music, Mark gets one artist on per week and asks all sorts of very detailed questions. Each artist I think they bring 3 songs a week, and they break it apart. They talk about how it was written. There's a lot of in-the-weeds questions about technology and music theory and the writing process. So if you really like getting into the weeds on some real technical questions on how things are done, this is a great podcast for you. I encourage you to check it out. Up next, number 5, we have the Weekly Song Podcast. Now, this is something completely different, too. We've got Roger Heathers and Declan Kitchener, 2 British guys who are friends and who write songs sometimes together, but usually just apart. And each week, each episode, they have some sort of challenge where they have to write a song and bring it in and talk about how they went through the process and what they did in order to get to the point, and they'll play the song for you. So it's a really cool example of getting to see the songwriting process in action. So if that's the kind of thing that scratches your itch, give it a try. Up next, number 6, we've got the Working Songwriter, hosted by Joe Pug. Now this one's a little bit different. For one thing, it only happens monthly, but it's still an interview with an artist. There's just one artist per week who comes onto the show. But Joe asks some really deep questions, and a lot of times what he's looking for is just what it's like to try and make a living as a songwriter. So they talk about all the different hats that songwriters have to wear, and the struggles of working and maybe trying to raise a family at the same time, or how it impacts your personal spiritual life. So if you're interested in those kinds of questions and digging into the roots of those kinds of issues, I really encourage you to check this one out. Up next, number 7, is Song Talk Radio. And again, this is very different from the other ones that we've had so far. This is a Canadian radio show that actually goes out over the airwaves, but they've turned it into a podcast too. So each episode's about exactly 1 hour. There's 3 hosts, but then they also have a whole wide variety of guests and different kinds of people that they'll bring on. And this can be all over the place. So sometimes it'll be an artist that's just breaking apart some of their songs. Sometimes it's somebody who has a different view on the process. So like they'll have a guest who's talking about writing for movies or writing for TV, or how to write songs for different kinds of live settings or different parts of the technical process. It's really quite a variety of different kinds of topics and themes that they have on this show. So if you want a particularly Canadian spin on things, or if you're just interested in a wide variety of topics, I encourage you to check this one out. Up next, for number 8, we've got Song Exploder. And again, this one's very different than the other ones, where each week there's an artist that comes on, but they bring with them just one song. And most of the time, they've even got some of the individual tracks so that you can hear how the drums fit together, how they came up with that part. And then here's the guitar that you can hear in isolation, so you can hear some of the effects that are on that. And they talk about how the composition and the recording and the production of all of it came together to make this one finished product. So if that's the kind of stuff you really like to get into, then check Song Exploder out. Now, for these last 2 podcasts that are part of my list, we're going to do something very different. These 2 aren't actually about songwriting per se, but they're going to give you some great ideas. Number 9 is Up First. Now, this is a daily podcast that comes out from NPR. Now, it's American news, so if those of you who aren't actually in America or don't care about American news, you can probably find something similar to wherever you're from. But the idea here is for Up First, they do 3 stories a day, talking about the top headlines for the day, just what's going on in the world around you. Now, I think that we as songwriters, even if we're not going to ever write any political songs or any cultural commentary songs, we still need to be aware of what's going on in the world around us, just so that even if we're writing songs tangentially about those kinds of things, we can be aware of what's going on in the zeitgeist and just stay up to date on what's going on in the world. I think that's a good thing for all of us. And now for number 10, I'm going to leave this one blank. I think that you should try a podcast, and there are podcasts on absolutely any topic out there. So pick something that's totally unrelated from songwriting, something that you're really into, just to stimulate your brain to think about new things. You might even find some song ideas in something totally unrelated to songwriting. For example, I listen to a lot of podcasts, on quite a wide variety of things. I listen to a bunch on politics. There's quite a few that I subscribe to that are on science, a couple on history, some other culture things, some theology things even. I listen to a whole bunch of different podcasts, and I've gotten great ideas for songs from things that were totally unrelated to songwriting. So check out the magical world of podcasting. There are all sorts of wonderful experiences out there to be had. And bonus round time. There's one podcast that's come out recently that didn't meet my criteria because it's not an ongoing podcast. It's just a couple of episodes. But I really think that everybody, no matter what kind of music you're into, what kind of songwriting you do, you should check this one out. It's called Dolly Parton's America, and it's put together by Jad Abumrad, who's the guy behind Radiolab. You've probably heard of Radiolab. And it's just a really deep dive into Dolly's history and how she writes songs. So there's a lot of very specific songwriting kinds of things in there, but it's also just a great look as to the cultural history and how she has interacted with that, and how songs can reflect what's going on in the culture, and how they can be how the songs impact culture, and how culture impacts what's going on in songs. There's just some really deep insight and some really great stuff in there. You should all check Dolly Parton's America out. So I hope that you can find some really cool and helpful things in these podcasts for songwriters. If you've got any favorites that I didn't list, feel free to comment below. Please hit subscribe or the little notification bell if you haven't done so already, and check in with us next week when we're going to be talking about all of the massive amounts of choices and options that there are for songwriters to have to sift through, and how to make difficult decisions when you're just feeling overwhelmed with too many choices.